This is Philosophy versus Improv, where two sages try to teach each other a thing or two, and maybe you, the audience, get something out of it as well.
My name is Bill Arnett, an improv CEO, yet tragically stuck down in the mailroom of philosophy.
This is Mark Linsenmeyer. I'm a philosophy independent contractor. I like to think of myself as the CEO of my own company, but there's really no difference. And so likewise with improv, I have no organizational. So I'd like to consider myself the highest possible for a one-man thing. Our guest, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jonny Thomson. I am a writer at Big Think, and I'm a philosophy author. And if anything, I overplan things, and then I ignore them. So yeah, I've got scripts and I've got notes coming out my ears, and then when push comes to shove, I just get on with it. Really.
Yes, we sometimes said whenever you're creating, you're always improvising. You're just doing it on the paper and then maybe fixing it later or whatever your mode is. Improv is at least half the creative process. So it's never foreign to anyone who is a writer or researcher, anyone who is producing output.
Yeah, exactly. So throw some stuff at the wall and some of it might look good. Some kind of modern art.
Oh boy, I tell you, that whole notion of starting things and putting things down and picking things back up again, I'm the same way. And I'm sure under some stack of papers, I've got like a teleportation chamber, unfinished. There's one screw left to be tightened.
I didn't know you were holding back on me, bud.
I'm not. I couldn't get that last screw tightened. So.
Fair enough. Yeah, Jonny, so you operate in the philosophy public space, but you also teach. Can you just give us a little background of where you're at?
So I'm actually full-time writing now. So I wrote a book called Mini Philosophy a couple of years ago, which has done okay. It's sold in a few countries, and it's kind of weird. Like, have some countries, the book's completely flopped. And then some countries it's done really well. So like the Polish, for example, can't get enough philosophy. They love it. And the South Koreans, likewise, they're philosophizing away, whereas the Italians and the Portuguese are they don't seem to like it that much. But I'm not sure it's not philosophy generally. I'm sure it's just my take on philosophy. And I'm writing for Big Think, and I'm writing for a publication called The Well, which is a kind of collaboration between Big Think and the John Templeton Foundation. And we kind of just unpack ideas and explore them in a fairly accessible, fairly fun way, I like to think. Without the jargon, I try to make it kind of relatable to people. So my background is essentially teaching. And I taught what is called sixth form over here in the UK, and that's kind of between 16 and 18-year-olds. So a really exciting area to teach, I think, because, they've got all these ideas. And if we have time to talk about Kierkegaard later on, existentialism, when you introduce these kids to existentialism, you say their lies, get excited about these 19th century philosophers who had the same ideas that they had, possibly better.
It's funny, you mentioned where it was popular, and you mentioned Poland and Korea, and then where it's unpopular, you mentioned some tropical places. Do you think that philosophy is more prominent in temperate climates where you're stuck inside all winter?
To be honest, my favorite philosophers are North European. Maybe something about the barren and stark outdoors maybe inclines a person to muse on death and existence.
Definitely Montesquieu and Nietzsche both commented how, it's too warm, your blood slows down, you just kind of lie around. That at least is less conducive on the average to the stark thinking that is required from having the wind whipping at your head in a chilly way.
Yeah, and my brother lives in Athens, and I visit him occasionally in the summer, and I just don't have any idea how Aristotle and Plato did any thinking out there at all. Because didn't Aristotle in the Peripatetics, didn't they? He used to walk around and philosophize all the time, and all I want to do is sit under a tree, under a stoa. Maybe the Stoics. That's what they're up to. That's why they was hiding in the shade. Maybe
it's like, we live in a paradise.
Yeah, exactly.
Although, Bill, you might be right about temperate. That if it's too cold. I know in the winters here in Wisconsin, I just want to bundle up and be a slug on the couch. You can't go out and experience the briskness if it's Antarctica. There's no Antarctic philosophers, as far as I know.
The other day about this, also about the idea that before electricity and before the phones, what did people do in the evenings? And just philosophizing would be it, wouldn't it? You'd all gather around the one candle in the house.
Read your Bible. That sometimes can count.
Yeah, exactly. Like Descartes sitting in his room by probably the one fire in the household. We kind of think, what a brilliant mind. But, what else was he up to? Well, actually, Descartes' a bad example. He did everything. He went, he was a soldier and he was a polymath. And
Jonny had brought up existentialism. I wanted to quiz you, Bill. Do you have a definition of existentialism from our past dealings here at the top of mind? Or should we just assume you know nothing?
I'm thinking there's a root word around existence. And I've certainly heard existential crisis, which is when people say they're having one, it's like our very existence is in jeopardy, or our sense of self or our sense of identity is in jeopardy.
There you go. It's not so much that AI might take over the world and kill us all. That's a different kind of existential worry. But of the existentialists, as in the continental philosophers of mostly France, but also Germany and America of the 1960s, 30s through 60s, I guess was sort of the big. Jonny, give us your compact definition, since I have only given a mere outline.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go the other extreme, kind of like trying to over-explain it possibly, because I don't think it's really explained well until Sartre in France, really. He wrote this kind of like this short book, almost like a pamphlet really, called Existentialism as a Humanism, doesn't he? Where it's a great quote, which is, existence precedes essence. It's almost better defined by what it's not, I think, because it's kind of not the idea that we are kind of born in some kind of prefabricated identity or essence. It's kind of very anti-religion in that way, although if we talk about Kierkegaard today, he actually is one of the few exceptions to that rule.
That's why I want to get us in through this, because Bill, you were characterizing it as, I don't know who I am. Well, that could mean that there's a right answer and that you just have to find that right answer. The existentialist view by Sartre, and what Jonny was just referring to, is there is no right answer. There is no essence thing that we are that precedes us just actually getting in there and making some choices. Use that as an introduction, Jonny, to say something about Kierkegaard, because Kierkegaard is a religious existentialist. Sartre is an atheist existentialist, so it's very natural that, nobody says, this is what human beings should be, and then it's our duty to just freely choose to be that thing. So an atheist is much more comfortable with it just being totally groundless, Camus, everything is absurd. But for a theist, you would think that there is a right answer. God tells us the right answer, and it's our job to sort of be responsible enough to choose correctly. Why is that not a good representation of Kierkegaard?
I agree. So actually, as I was researching for this, I did look at it in the question. He's called the father of existentialism, and I think it's a slightly backdated term for Kierkegaard, because in the 20th century France, you do have like Christian existentialists. You have like a guy called Gabriel Marcel, who's this big one, who actually I think he is much better at the job of reconciling Christianity and existentialism. Whereas I think with Kierkegaard, he doesn't do that well. I mean, it's difficult because if you say anything about Kierkegaard, there'll be someone who will present you another book, another chapter, which kind of contradicts what you're saying. But if we're taking existentialism as this kind of vague idea that you're trying to kind of make your own path in life, you're going to choose your own route, be yourself, be this authentic essence you talked about there. And yet Kierkegaard's, two of his three, or I hope we get into this stages of existence, what we call the ethical stage and the religious phase, kind of involve committing yourself to something else, or at least kind of like letting yourself be subject to something else. When Kierkegaard talks about being authentic, I think he actually means you're surrendering your authentic self to some kind of higher power, which obviously doesn't sound very. Sartre would be rolling his grave reading that, and Nietzsche would be frothing at the mouth, committing to something else which is beyond you. But he is all about kind of subjective experience and beginning with human passion. And he hated Hegel, really, didn't he? He hated the idea that we're all part of this kind of like this universal spirit moving forward and that the individuals don't matter at all. I think he just didn't have much time for that. So I think that's where the existentialist bit comes with Kierkegaard.
Any thoughts so far, Bill?
Well, you mentioned earlier AI, robots taking over humanity, and that we would not be talking about that.
In other words, them actually killing us. If there are existential threats like the climate disaster, that's just a different form of the word.
Fine. It was an opportunity to talk about robots killing humanity. And
there might well be something too. Certainly when you get into questions of artificial intelligence or something, then you could be asking, would the same, right? This sort of starts with Kant making generalizations about any rational creature has to assume that it's free, that can make these free choices. And this is where folks like Kierkegaard take off from in stressing the absolute freedom of our choices, that even if God is up there telling us, you really should do this thing, you could always say no. There's nothing built into the human growth pattern, like an acorn has to become a tree as long as it gets water. Whereas a human being, it's not clear that we just have an individual telos, a specific way that we're supposed to grow. So even Kierkegaard, even though he says he really feels like you should jump toward what God says, but it's not required of you just as a being, right?
In high school, when I was 16 to 18, I had an English teacher who was very big on the Romantic literature movement. And this is the same era, is it not? The kind of 19th century.
This is just after Romanticism. So Kierkegaard was reacting specifically to Romanticism.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So this book, Jonny and I sort of corresponded a little bit and said we should talk. He threw out some options. I informed him, as I'm now informing the audience. So Partially Examined Life that I do is just finishing up a stretch on his big book, Either Or, which had I discovered you a month earlier, Jonny, I would have invited you on that podcast to actually get into the text with me. But this will be the extra little bit for folks. So I'm not going to rehash everything that's on there. But the big thing is it's cut in half, and both of them are written under pseudonyms. These are characters.
So he didn't read either of them.
So these are characters that he's setting up.
Neither nor. It should be.
Yeah, so you have to wonder. In fact, his first book that we also have a Partially Examine Life episode on is on irony, and that he sets up like, yes, every philosopher should use irony to be able to say things that they don't have to stand behind. This is not my theory. This is a theory I'm considering. So the first half of it is from the aesthetic point of view, the artist here. So it's a bunch of essays written by this character. It doesn't even have a name, just A. Kierkegaard is exploring the trials and tribulations of someone who's trying to live just according to, I want to live my life as a work of art. I want to make it beautiful, but then you might get depressed a lot. The second half is from the ethical point of view, explicitly scolding the first guy. You are living in a very shallow way. You never actually make any choices. We talked about this last time, Bill. This is why I wanted to get into this. Even committing to marriage. Okay, you're actually putting yourself in the world in a specific spot, and that's a good thing. Whereas just, I just want to drift and I want to explore and I want to dabble, that there's something shallow about that. It's sort of left after that, the ethical point of view. Is that Kierkegaard's actual view? We sort of know from other things that he wanted us to go even beyond that to a religious one, but I don't care if this discussion gets beyond that. Yeah, Jonny, add some detail to what I just said.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I also kind of wrote the actual book either, or he wrote that under a pseudonym as well. All popular society in Denmark at the time knew it was him. And you got the impression that he's the kind of person who would have quite liked that, I think. He would have liked, walking around like this mysterious kind of like not author of this great book. He saw himself as being this kind of like this Danish Socrates. And Socrates was eventually killed back in Athens for being basically really annoying. And he had a similar kind of vibe. He was known to go for walks through the streets where he'd be kind of like interviewing and talking to people. And so I think, he sees his book and all his works generally kind of like form this kind of like, if there's anything uniting them all, it's this kind of invitation to kind of question yourself and question what you hold dear. And I think the other thing is that if you read it, obviously today it's nothing, but in 19th century Denmark, particularly like he was a Lutheran, there's very Lutheran Christians in Denmark. Some of the first book, particularly about A, that there are some quite racy bits by 19th century Denmark Times. So this aesthete, for example, he can unashamedly admit to kind of like drinking and hanging about and stuff and seducing. If he's called the seducer's diary, and seducing people and having no qualms whatsoever, breaking their heart and kind of moving on to the next one, really. That would have been, a pearl-clutching nightmare for people in 19th century Denmark.
So just to fill in, Bill, you asked about romanticism. What Jonny's describing, the aesthetic point of view, that is his take on romanticism. So he's saying, kids today, these romantic bastards, all act like this, and this is what he's writing. So I'm just going to write something from that point of view so that I can then criticize it.
Well, when you mentioned, Jonny, that, your students like get excited about these things. And I've always thought about that. That was the reaction of some, but not all the people in English class when we got to talk about the romantic. Both of them, and stop me if I'm wrong here, seem to be I wouldn't say anti-authoritarian, but there's a lot of agency on the person. They're granting the person a tremendous amount of self-determination. You have some mobility, I guess. And certainly, as you said, perhaps Kierkegaard wants us to choose the right thing, but you can choose. And certainly for far much of the history of humanity, you've never been able to choose anything. Your life is whatever station you're born into. And I don't know, perhaps historically, these philosophies are born out of the very possibility of mobility.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Tie up hundreds of years and put one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think they hit the nail on the head. And I think the reason we call him the father of existentialism today is because Sartre looks back on Kierkegaard, and the bit he loves really about Kierkegaard is this anxiety of freedom, really, this kind of like this analysis paralysis, the dizziness of freedom. Because Kierkegaard does talk about that we have this power to choose, and it's terrifying. That it's far easier to be, I think it was a cipher at one point. It's far easier to be a nothing person and let other people choose for you. And yeah, and he does definitely kind of call on the reader to choose life in a very kind of train spotting way. I don't know if I'm dating myself, so I used to love train spotting, that opening scene. I used to reference to my kids, and of course they just kind of like rolled their eyes and they had no idea what I was talking about. I was like, choose life, choose this. And they, what are you talking about, Mr. Thomson? I don't know.
Don't just let your baby take heroin. I believe that was one of the lessons that came out of that film, unless I'm confused again.
Yeah.
You have to choose to let your baby take care.
Which I think Kierkegaard would probably agree with. Yeah, I think that. But then also, this is why I said there's a confusion and paradox lurking within Kierkegaard. I mean, Kierkegaard himself, he embraces paradox. He says he loves paradox, which I think sometimes can be a bit of a cop-out for him. You know, if anything's a little bit confusing or contradictory, kind of say, well, paradox. But again, while he does say you have to choose and you have to basically embrace everything with passion, you have to select yourself. His ethical sphere or the ethical stage, which Mark was talking about, is, for me, whenever I read it, I just read Kant. I just read embracing this duty and being a civilized, respectable member of society. And yet, Bill, I think you're right. There is a big contrarian element to him, not least because in his own life, he broke off his engagement with this person called Regina Olsen, which was quite the scandal of the time. That was the Bridgerton of 19th century Denmark.
It's time to stop and read some ads. Read some ads. Are you interested in the parts of history that remain a mystery? Do you want to learn more about the historical myths and misconceptions used to prop up false beliefs today? The podcast Historical Blindness delves into all these topics, sharing puzzling tales from the past and examining hoaxes, conspiracy theories, and misremembered events that provide insight into modern politics and religion. Find out what's real and what's not when it comes to famous conspiracy claims like those surrounding the notorious assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and JFK, and secret societies like the Illuminati. Discover astonishing parallels to modern politics and consider some of the most outlandish claims about religion. What can the false claim that AIDS was a U.S. bioweapon tell us about the COVID lab leak hypothesis? Why do some people claim that all religion can be traced back to ancient use of psychedelic mushrooms? Join host Nathaniel Lloyd as he attempts to shed some light on historical blind spots and fight the misinformation that permeates many people's historical worldview. Find and subscribe to Historical Blindness wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit historicalblindness.com. Check out newer episodes first, then go back and binge the back catalog. I feel like we need to grind this very productive discussion to a halt with an improv scene, hopefully to
Awesome.
that can explore some of what we've said here from the inside. It's as if we're three Kierkegaards forced in a room together to do a scene.
Well, I'm not sure how much improv you've done, Johnny, but this is real straightforward and simple. And what do I always say, Mark?
We've already been improvising
this entire time. And the idea is we're just going to be someone other than yourself. Now, I do have a little lesson in mind, and I'll try to do it, but often the philosophy ends up co-opting it, or a new lesson emerges that I find is cooler and more interesting. And then I, without telling anybody, change the lesson to that. And then at the end, present this miraculous thing that just fit magically into everything that we've been talking about. But I won't this time. I promise I won't this time.
Forced synchronicity.
Yeah. You're a real person. You're just someone other than yourself. You can be very close to yourself. That's fine. Say whatever you want. You can say no. You can ask questions. You can do whatever you want. But just realize we're growing this thing together. And you have to live with the consequences of your actions. Mark, you ready?
I'm ready to make that leap.
Okay. I think I've got something. Well, everybody, we have got an awesome Boy Scout camping trip coming up next week. And I hope I can count on you, senior scouts, to make this a great trip.
Definitely. Have we made the list of kind of what merit badges we're pushing? It's
going to be kind of like a canoeing trip. We'll do some camping and canoeing. I just figured, maybe we can knock a few things off. It's just a camp out. We don't need to be too stressed about it.
When I personally am advising the younger folks, you want to get the eagle, right? You want to get to the top. So you got to be organized. You got to fit in. How many merit badges can you fit in this summer? And so by extension, in this trip, how many? I think we really need to stress time management. This is not just about fun. They learn fun everywhere else. Boy Scouts is a place for discipline. It's basically a paramilitary organization. I think this is the way of, we get people into being really organized human beings.
Mark, some of these kids are 12. Some of the younger scouts are quite young, and they do want to have fun. They do want to have a good time. All right. We just got to plan this thing. We don't need to, I don't think we get a ton of merit badges done.
Are we got a route in mind? Are we going to go on the river? Are we going to let the river take us downstream? Are we going to just go with the flow, get our dowel on?
We've got a campsite booked, and we'll have a load in with the gear, and then we'll canoe down to the campsite. That's all. We got that booked.
I like this. So who's backing the beers?
I'm sorry? The beers?
The beers.
We aren't allowed to bring beers on a Boy Scout camp. They're going to be 12-year-olds, as I said.
They're more into porn than beers. They'll bring their own porn. We don't really have to. Firecrackers.
That's fair.
Are either of you even 18 yet?
Very soon.
I can be.
We shouldn't be talking about porn or beer at all. You know the reputation the Scouts has. So we're trying to push back against it every day.
Okay, good point. My bad. Can we brew beer on the trip.
That would be a good merit badge.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt you'll have time. A, B, no. Y'all, I'm looking to y'all for leadership. I'm looking for y'all to try to set up some activities we can do. We can set up a compass course. Maybe do some flashlight tag. Maybe have a cooking competition, huh? We can do a little demo, a little campfire cooking,
Plant, herb finding.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Now we're talking. Yeah. Finding plants, identifying trees and shrubs. Okay. There we go. Thank you, Johnny.
Any particular kind of herbs we might be able to find on the way?
Okay. You know what? Are you going to say marijuana? Is that what you're going for?
I don't think the kids are into that yet.
No, they're not.
Oh,
I'm just going to cut you two off.
Marijuana? They're 12.
15 is the age. Most of the cool kids, I understand, drop out before they get to be our age. We've made peace with that. We have our own kind of cool that we have selected. It does not necessarily involve the wacky weed, but no, not for 12-year-olds.
I tell you what, you can do a plant identification right out of the handbook. How about that?
I like that.
Okay. All right.
If we can't take beer and we can't take anything else, can we teach them how to behave if we were to bring beer? Can that be a badge?
How?
Moral character, force of character?
Yeah. I think there are some valuable skills that ones could learn under the influence of beer. And I think I am well placed to teach this.
There's some skills to learn outside of the influence of beer around beer, but I'm not sure if, I'm not going to lie, there is a requirement regarding drug and alcohol awareness. And I hesitate strongly asking you, please, what would you say is one lesson regarding drug and alcohol awareness? And I am very worried.
Limit fire construction.
Okay.
To about 4 or 5 beers.
All right. I was going to say 0 until you're of age.
I would say limit the use of hunting gear to about 3 beers.
Okay.
See, I thought this was just how to say no. We're building character. People need to know that if an adult were to bring something like this, an adult like I am practically, on a trip like this, then they would have to know exactly who to snitch to in the most efficient way.
You guys are 17? Really? We're going on a Boy Scout camping trip. This isn't a frat house, all right?
I've been on some Boy Scouting trips in my time, and I know what these boys want to really know. I'm 17, but I've raised in the school of hard knocks. I know what you can and cannot do after 3 beers. And I think it's about time these 12-year-olds, they learned the hard way on this trip.
You're going to terrify them. They're going to be frightened. I don't think they're going to be paying attention to this.
Snowflake culture.
It's just a matter of sublimating to put it in appropriate channels so that if you're teaching them information and they understand that they're working toward a particular merit badge, I would have to look at the particular descriptions, but I think we could probably work in, a lot of them are pretty flexible, maybe food service merit badge. That's one that I got very early on. And I think you could put in something about drug and alcohol awareness right into that.
Look, I'm not going to lie. All right. When I was in the Scouts, when I was your age, you get a bunch of guys in the woods, only a couple adults, you talk, right? There's some locker room talk. You talk about beer, you talk about things, sex, you talk about those topics. I can't stop that. I don't want to police that per se, but we cannot do an officially sanctioned, I can't be around for any of those things, A. And B, let's say I get a parent who calls and complains. My son came home yelling at me that he could have 2 beers and still get his homework done.
We should also be teaching, I think part of it is not just saying no and snitching in the appropriate way, but also what to say to who when. If the deed is done, hold your tongue.
How to get away with it.
Don't tell your parents. Isn't that the Boy Scout motto? Don't tell your parents.
Far from it. Far from it. Look, guys, you mentioned we're got a canoe trip. Just give me 3 things that we can do on this trip that are the most boring, Scout approved, adult approved things. All right. When it's just the boys hanging out, I get it. The topic can wander. All right. But I need to be able to say this was the plan. Can we just get 3 things? Can we do this?
Tin opening, definitely required. Starting and can opening. Starting and finding fires in the wilderness.
Yes, starting fires. That is a big thing. They're so into that.
Can we call it fire safety? Can we call it fire responsible?
Yeah, exactly. They're going to do it as soon as we get there. That is like the thing that they love the most. I know this from experience. So yeah, we got to harness this and make this part of their education, not just something they're doing outside of the scope of any sort of supervision.
Natural painkillers. for the morning.
Natural painkillers for the morning.
When we all wake up a bit sore of head.
With burns.
With burns. Yeah.
Y'all, you got real close. You got so close, all right? Can opening could have been cooking, right? And fire safety is definitely a scout thing. How about I provide the third, okay? And I want you boys to, you're the older scouts now. You need to prepare some activities here, okay? Knot tying, okay? We'll just do some basic knot tying. How about that? Knot tying, cooking, fire safety. And you can roll fire safety right into cooking. You see how this works?
Okay, we're just going to have to see who they're in the mood to tie up, though, after you present your third option to them.
No, we're not tying up anybody.
There's a lot of energy out there.
Boys, is everything okay at home? Boys, is this for real? Is this who you are? Or are you trying to show off to an adult that you know about beer and things? And is this for real?
Do you think a rebranding's in order? There's a lot of kind of like negativity around the Boy Scouts these days. And I know that numbers are flagging. I know that we're trying our best to get numbers up. And I'm trying a fresh way. Fresh, original, arm burning, tin opening, pain-killing way.
Wow. Okay. Let's do this. Mark, Johnny, you guys want some beers? I'm going to call this bluff. I'm going to call this bluff right now. I'm going to call this bluff. I happen to have a case in the fridge. You guys want some beers?
I'm prepared. Sir, no, I would not enjoy some beer right now.
Bill, this is a Boy Scout trip. That's wildly inappropriate to bring beers right now.
We're snitching to your higher up. Yeah, I think you're going to be out of a job.
Well, this explains it. All right. Fine. All right.
All right. So we've performed a coup. Is that it?
We'll stop there.
The inmates are now running the asylum.
Yes. I wasn't convinced that they probably were pretty wild kids, but there's that whole thing of like kids putting on the fake, steal that half a wine cooler and sneak out behind the shed. Is this now you're really bad, aren't you? How bad are these kids? Yeah.
Yeah, bringing the beers. Everyone secretly doesn't want to have one.
Yeah.
Sorry for derailed that, guys. That was the first time I've ever done something like that. And I kind of like
There's no derailing possible. It was so...
Right.
I felt like, to take a Kierkegaardian, that you were maybe taking the more straightforwardly aesthetic position of that kind of rebellion, whereas I was at least trying to do something that was a little closer to the ethical, though not with maybe a novel theory of ethics at play, of sublimating those. You can't actually get rid of the poor behavior, so you should just make it somehow official.
Yeah. It's all part of a merit badge.
Does that mean Bill represents the voice of God in Fear and Trembling as well?
I think the voice of the they, of mere society, uncreatively trying to get everybody to go along with the group.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think the children would have enjoyed my trip more than your trip. All right, there we go. I said it. The first thing you said, Johnny, which was I immediately set off my philosophy antenna, was, will we just let the river take us?
Oh, yeah.
Which it felt very much like, let's just go crazy. Let's just sit in the boats and just let them have like.
Yeah. But actually, I messaged Mark in our email conversation before this. I'm reading a lot about Taoism at the moment. So I guess it's probably Taoism on the unconscious mind. That's what it is, going with the flow. And which actually isn't a million miles away from Kierkegaard, really. In his Fear and Trembling, in this idea that he has to commit to God's will over anything else is kind of like a surrendering of the self entirely into this supernatural force, really.
What would be the perfect Kierkegaardian Boy Scout trip? What would that look like?
Gee, I know he's such an independent. I feel like he would reject any sort of paramilitary organization like this at all.
No uniforms.
Did mention the tying up at one point, and
okay.
In his Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard does basically lionize the figure of Abraham, who takes his son up the mountain, ties him on an altar, and is about to kill him with a knife. And then God steps in and says, no, don't do this. It's been a test. So maybe a Kierkegaardian kind of like Boy Scout trip would be a historic reenactment of, was it Mount Sinai? I want to say it's Mount Sinai.
With the Scoutmasters frantically, stop killing each other. Are you kidding?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I come into this with a very mixed I was a scout as a very young person. And yes, we were all about the porn and the lighting things on fire at age, I had quit before 12, but I think 11. Yeah. And being very suspicious of the guys who would stick with it until they were 17. What is your social life? What high school did you go to that they let you do this?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we don't have anything like that really over here in the UK. Well, we have kind of like, we have beavers, which is very young, and then we have kind of like scouts, but it kind of, definitely stops around like 12 or 13. Yeah, I think you're right. For us, I think it's anything over 15 would you'd look askance at them a little bit. Yeah.
There is a definite drop off in interest once people start discovering. Yes.
Yeah.
It's funny. My son is in the Boy Scout troop, and right now, so many parents are like, I just want my kid to get outside, get off the screens, do something outside, do something with other people, and it's like, Boy Scouts kind of does, it kind of does all that. You're outside with other people, no technology. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Boy Scouts. Got a real black eye over here. Okay.
No. Yeah. I mean, that's very Kierkegaard, isn't it? Yeah. Going out and just talking. I guess going back to what we were saying earlier, like, kind of like philosophizing and stuff on a good hike.
So no uniforms, no plan, no activities are planned.
Well, yeah, I mean, the ethical sphere would probably be more planned. Yeah, I think the aesthetes would kind of be, they would be drinking their beer in their camp, wouldn't they? And they'd be having a great old time, and they'd need the hangover cure. But I think the ethical, I mean, if we're dividing our boy camp into three different kind of like warring tribes, the aesthetic who are drinking their beers, and the ethical who are definitely kind of like being nice to each other, and I think then the religious sphere who are all like waiting for the voice of God.
Would they all come together for a big campfire at the end and songs and skits? Or is that like...
Well, actually, do you know what? We kind of hit on a kind of interesting point about Kierkegaard, actually, about where these kind of are they personality types existing within one person, like at any time, or are they kind of stages, like between one day to another or year to year? Or is it kind of like a schizophrenic kind of like flipping between them within minutes, within moments and stuff? And yeah, if we're seeing them like camps, it's a slightly Freudian look of the unconscious, isn't it? The psyche. There's like these three warring ego, super ego and id fighting each other.
Okay.
What complicates things for Kierkegaard is that first stage, the aesthetic stage. You could in fact be like, I'm going to be a priest now. And you could study furiously to be a priest. But the point is you don't stick with it. Is that it's still dabbling. So the aesthetic person could imitate any of the other ones, and you wouldn't necessarily know by looking at them. Should I really take you seriously as a human being or not? Yeah. That's sort of what it comes down to, is if you haven't made the leap to the ethical, but then when you made the leap, it's not that you become a stern moralist. You can retain artistic judgments between things, but they're all recontextualized because you are now centered as an ethical person. So it's hard to say it's just like three personality types, because
what's the third one?
I mean, maybe they are stages. The third one is the religious, where even what might seem, Jonny was just giving the example, it seems like you should not kill your child. Right? But what if God tells you to kill your child? Well, then I guess let's set the ethical aside, because there's something more important that's come along, and I don't pretend to understand that move at all.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
He's very careful to differentiate it from like what he calls something like a tragic hero, where you could vaguely try to justify it to someone. Like he gives the example of Agamemnon, who sacrifices his, I want to say, daughter, so that whatever god it was could give it that favorable wind, so he could invade Troy. And and the argument is that at the time you could vaguely justify that to your soldiers, say, I don't want to kill my daughter, but I got to do it, guys, for the greater good. Whereas Abraham doesn't have that available to him. He just kind of grabs Isaac and goes for a walk. And his wife Sarah's going, "Where are you going, darling?" Just going up the hill for a bit with the son. I can't really explain to you.
What are you doing with those chains?
Yeah, exactly. Dad, let's go. Where's the lamb, Daddy? In fact, doesn't he say that in the Bible? I want to say at one point, he said, does he ask where the lamb is?
I'll be rereading that essay before too long, so I will know the details, but I do not recall.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think how my improv lesson fits into all this, and I think it might.
Do you want to be more explicit with it with another?
We can. Now, I can text it to you, Mark, what the technique is. Oftentimes, Jonny, when it comes to improv, certainly there's miles and miles of philosophy and people stay at the bar all night talking about it. But I'm a big fan of, we also need a practical element as well. And through that practical element, we can, I think, better explore the philosophical element. Because sometimes we'll get caught in these philosophical conversations. It's like, if we can't produce that or reproduce that, what you're trying to do, is it even worth our time? If that makes a little bit of sense. That may have sounded
Let's more better explore it, Bill.
More better explore it. All right. So Mark, I'm going to text you what it is here.
I'm observing my chat, waiting for the message to come in.
Okay, there it is. Yes. Okay. Does that make sense? Did you notice me doing that?
No, because I didn't remember how it started.
You're too busy improvising. Wow. Okay. Does that make some sense?
Yes.
All right.
Now, this is a big step. I know you might have had some fantasies about what military life was like, but now you're here. You've put aside your educations. You're going to take the plunge, and it's going to be a serious thing, a very, very big step. Are there any initial questions you might have about this life on which you are about to embark? Yes, sir, in the back.
Can I drive a tank?
There is a track for studying, so eventually
Awesome.
you can drive a tank, but maybe be a little less eager about that because it's not going to happen soon. You're going to have to do a lot of push-ups. You're going to have to fundamentally become a different person before you can drive a tank.
Are there any desk jobs available?
There are many desk jobs available. There are officers typically are not out on the front lines with their people. They make decisions about life and death, but you got to do a lot of push-ups. You might even have to drive a tank before you can sit behind a desk. There are lots of different routes you could take, but you look very skinny. You look a little weak, and you're going to have to really change. This is a big step you're going to have to take.
Dude.
Are you ready?
You want a desk job?
Yeah, I don't like tanks, really. I don't like push-ups, actually. I like sometimes watching tanks. They're quite nice. Yeah.
Join the army, dude.
I think it might have been a mistake. I don't remember writing it down on the list. Last thing I remember, I was on a Boy Scout trip, and now we have to sign some kind of document, and here I am. I don't remember.
All of you that earned the paramilitary merit badge were then sent over here because you're ready. I think your scout leaders thought you were ready to take this big step.
Paramilitary?
If you don't want to take it, I mean, you could back out and be some kind of wuss, but really, though it's entirely up to you, really, the challenge of being a human being is best met by taking this step, becoming a new kind of person. Don't you want to become a new, stronger?
Give me a flag to salute.
Paramilitary? All I remember was paranormal, maybe. I remember telling some ghost stories. Paramount. I enjoyed movies. Paramilitary?
You will have to face your own ghosts, your deepest demons, to come out on the other side, a fiery new Ubermensch, if you will, some kind of more deserving human being.
Sounds very fierce.
Yes.
Sounds a bit too much.
Do you like action movies? Like Schwarzenegger or Jason Statham? You know what I'm saying? Like, do any of those guys sit behind desks?
It's quite loud, aren't they? They're quite big bangs.
Yeah.
Occasionally, but I turn it down to volume 1, volume 2 if it's quite far away.
Many of our drone pilots, they sit behind a desk and they push the buttons and the killing happens very far away. You could turn the volume as low as you want, but you have to have that strength of character to be able to make the decisions about life and death. It's a big step. Maybe it's not everybody's ready to make it.
You keep using that word strength of character. Killing people? I'm not sure I like the sound of killing people.
When necessary, it's not indiscriminate. It is only
killing the enemy.
Yes, the enemy.
Oh, enemy? They're just friends you haven't met yet, aren't they?
Oh, gosh.
Friends are only enemies that you've already conquered and can therefore treat with comfort that they're not going to stab you in the back. You have to have friendship through strength. You don't sound actually American. Are you sure you're come to the right military?
I'm awfully lost, you know. I was on a Boy Scout trip in Bristol in southwest England. Next thing I know, I'm at GI training in America for some kind of paramilitary organization. I could sit behind a desk if you want, and I could push around some drones. Maybe I could take some aerial photos with my drones. I'm very good at catching a good shot.
Bro, look, it takes all types. I get it. It takes all types, but I need to know I can count on you when the chips are down. You know what I'm saying? Can I count on you when the chips are down?
Count on me. We might need to define what you mean by count on me.
If you're at your desk in a foxhole and I'm in the same foxhole, not with a desk because I wouldn't have a desk.
You can count on me to adequately resource your platoon with a well-ordered, well-calculated spreadsheet of materials and assets.
At this point, there were technical difficulties with my audio. As an audience member, I'd like to suggest that the remainder of the scene was redacted because it was that good.
Oh, we've lost Mark.
Mark's kind of gone now.
Hey, I'm back.
And scene.
And scene.
Perfect.
I think having the authority figure go literally deaf, I think there's some just sort of divine intervention there. Maybe we've demonstrated the influence of the religious there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You always find God in the foxhole, don't you? That's where a lot of people hear their voices.
Yeah. So, Mark, I asked you to do something.
It was a big step. You asked me to repeat the same line. See, when you messaged me, repeat the same line as the scene goes along. You didn't say, repeat my first line. So I was waiting for you to give the first line. I thought this was a different lesson.
Implied.
A different lesson. But yes.
What did it do for you? What did it do for repeating the? So I asked Mark to just remember what the first line is and try to inject it periodically throughout the scene. Remember what it was and bring it back. I did that. If you go back and listen to the tape, I did that with the scout trip.
What was the first line?
We're going on a trip. This is just a scout trip. This is just a camp out. We're just going on a camping trip. The exact words may have changed a little bit, but that point of view, that notion, I tried to maintain the entire time. Any guesses, Mark, why I asked you to do that and what it did for us or did for the scene?
I like it as a structuring element, either to pull you back to expressing your character. I think I was still doing it that way, but it was evolving as it went. I couldn't decide, is this something that you're freely choosing? Because clearly Johnny's character should just go home.
Yes.
To keep that character engaged, I think my ultimate destination, had my audio not cut out, was this was some sort of Willy Wonka situation where perhaps you, Bill, would be given the keys to the army.
Awesome.
Something of that sort. Whereas Johnny clearly has, like Augustus Gloop, gone up the tube. There, some sort of did not pass the test.
Yeah.
Is not ready for some football, so they say in America.
Well, I'm kind of curious if there's a philosophical connection here. And it's this idea that sometimes improvisers get into trouble. And if you read books or things, you'll see it's like a game of ping pong. Improv's like chess. Improv, and it uses these analogies that your partner says something and you say something. Your partner says something and you say something, back and forth, until it's over. But I always feel like sometimes you get players who will play ping pong, as the analogy might go, table tennis, but not realize that they've been playing table tennis for a long time, for 2 minutes, and things may have happened earlier that are still important now, or the reason why you sat down to play, and that we are numb to the preceding moments and are simply in the moment, completely in the moment, but not realizing we're carrying the baggage of the past with us. And that by restating the past and by constantly saying, this is a big step, we are reinforcing what got the whole thing going in the first place. You chose that first line, Mark, because you're like, this is a big step in these boys' life. This is a big step. And you can't, why would that suddenly not be important to you? Now, if it isn't, if for some reason it becomes unimportant, we just need to see that journey, because no one just changes willy-nilly. So sometimes when people are chasing a laugh, trying to be funny, trying to be witty, they end up trampling all over the past, trampling over who. It would be really funny if I also wanted to work at a desk, Mark might say, but it's like, that guy wouldn't do that. That's not who we met at the beginning, and we need to be true to that. Anything in there, any philosophy, any connections in there.
This seems clearly Kierkegaardian in terms of the ethical point of view, at least, of decide who you are. Again, what's complicated about it is it's not just decide that you are a priest or whatever. It is decide that you are a freely choosing person. That's the first choice. Mm-hmm. And from there, you could still change your mind and things. It's not saying reduce yourself to this identity, because that would be denying your free choice. That would be, so this is why I still consider him an existentialist, is because even though you're trying to be serious about this, well, Sartre says you should be serious too. He just doesn't think there's a specific destination. But again, I might be looking at him Kierkegaard too much through right now, because I'm reading about the ethical, basically through a Kantian lens, as opposed to where he ends up.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also the idea of labels as well is a very interesting thing in existentialism. And I think obviously improv, well, that was my first ever kind of window into improv. So I'm not an authority on it, but the idea that you maybe get a label and you kind of have to then live within that label.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's it's almost anti-existentialist, isn't it? I think existentialists would, they would say that, Well, actually, I don't know. Well, it's going back to what Mark said earlier about kind of like, on the face of it, if you saw someone, two people, they could look the same, doing the same things, but one person is authentic and living the existentially true to themselves, while one person is living to a label. The difference is maybe that kind of like the psychological acceptance of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And or maybe enjoying it and identifying with that label is like a conscious kind of, affirmation, possibly of the label.
And that was a great scene, John. I very much appreciate it. You're just like totally milquetoast guy who just found himself not meaning to be there. That was really fun.
Yeah,
but again, I think there's that, and you've heard that notion of that there's freedom and restriction. This idea that when you're in some bounded area, then you can explore it more completely, which is fun.
Yeah, and I remember an English teacher at school used to say a thing that if you told like what's called year 9 over here, so we're talking about 13-year-olds, like to write a story. Again, the Kierkegaard, there's analysis paralysis. There's kind of like they just can't start. Whereas you say like write a story involving pirates, or write a story like of your last holiday, or write a story about a dog named Peter. That suddenly they can roll with it, and it's really easy. And so you give them kind of like a framework within which to be creative. Often elicits greater answers and more fluidity. Really
fantastic.
So, Johnny, as someone a little more familiar maybe with Kierkegaard's Final Destination, is he trying to incorporate the creativity involved in the romantic moment from the aesthetic point of view into the religious? Is that's like part of what is maybe missing from the ethical, is you need to add back more of the zing from stage 1. And so stage 3 ends up being the glorious synthesis, as opposed to something totally unrelated. Well, let's just pay attention to God instead of these more normal things.
Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe an issue with Kierkegaard, or maybe the reason why he kind of like jars for me sometimes, is I thought he lumps all pleasures all together, higher, lower pleasures, what John Stuart Mill calls higher and lower pleasures, into this universal aesthetic sphere. So, like, binge drinking your booze on your Boy Scouts trip and having your bucket of KFC, that is in the aesthetic sphere, but so too is kind of like drinking a really expensive bottle of champagne, or also like maybe even things like, the reason why it matters to me is I have 2 kids and I really enjoy spending time with my kids. Is my motivation for spending time with the kids, is that the aesthetic sphere? Yes, possibly. Obviously, being a parent involves duty, it involves commitment, and it involves a self-sacrifice. But also sometimes it's just really fun. I just really enjoy like being daft and playing around with them. Would Kierkegaard say that is being a hedonist? Ultimately, it's being aesthetic.
No, because this I am comfortable with, that even in the ethical, that you get to retain the aesthetic. It's just recontextualized. So it would not, yes, when you know already authentically who you are, yes, you can play, but it's just your whole existence does not become play. It's the poet existence of my whole life will basically be evaluated on grounds of how beautiful or fun or whatever it is at every moment. Because then I'm bored of my kids today. Let's just completely neglect them. Whereas duty should, even if you're not having fun at the moment, duty should then kick in and you should keep taking care of them.
Yeah. I'm off, guys. Yeah, I'm off down the Boy Scout pub. Yeah.
He just strolled around Copenhagen trying to strike up conversations with people about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he used to love people. He used to do something what's called the people bath, where he kind of like, literally, yeah, I know, which is basically what we call people watching. Like, you go into a cafe like, on your own, just watching people go about their lives. He'd do it all the time, just kind of like just watch people. Yeah, if you read his diaries, there were quite a few kind of like odd moments. Like, apparently he would do this thing where he would like, so rather than go to the theatre or something, like he would join the people are chatting in the interval to make it look like he was there. And when everyone else went inside to the theatre, he'd go home and read a book. So to pretend that he was part of the crowd with everyone. So yeah, and like, I think he was always tormented by this kind of like break off his engagement thing. But really, really interesting character, I think.
Did he have friends? You've just mentioned two I'm going to stand outside of people and just watch. I'm not actually going to join the people.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's always said to be in conversation with someone, but I talk to people I don't necessarily get on with, or what we call a friend, maybe. But I don't know. His dad was very strict Lutheran character. And actually, so when I first introduced him to my students, I said his name translates in English as severe graveyard. Which kind of gives you a window into kind of his family's kind of that naming activity, really. And this poor guy possibly was kind of had to break out from this. Actually, Nietzsche came from a similar background himself, actually. His family were quite strictly religious. So maybe there's something Freudian there. It's like maybe a whole other episode on psychoanalysis or philosophers.
Yes, I know in the same part of Either Or where he goes on and on about marriage and its virtues, he also goes on about friendship and rooting yourself as a good, dutiful friend. But again, he himself did not stay married. Contra the advice of this character in the ethical section, it might be just a matter of, yeah, I can see the point of this and maybe I should have done this. I don't know how much personal regret he had. I have not read enough of his, apparently, his journals are very, very extensive. So you can find out all about his personal life if you want.
He also wrote this book called The Works on Love or Works of Love. I can't remember which. And where he basically says that, they're essentially like, there's different types of love and they're kind of like almost like a grading, a progression, which actually mirrors Plato, actually. It's quite similar to Plato, I believe, today. It starts with, on the most basic level, you have this kind of what we call romantic love, eros, this kind of level. And then it goes all the way up to Christian agapeic kind of love, where you love of humanity, love of anyone. And I suspect that probably friendship's somewhere along that road, probably near it everyone.
Yeah, that has to be, if ultimately Christianity is where you're supposed to get, then it has to be that. It can't be just love out of duty or whatever,
Yeah.
That would be the intermediate ethical stage. But the whole point is to keep it authentic all the way up. So you might think like the only authentic people are those artist types who are all about seize the day, be yourself, craft yourself into an authentic individual. But he wants to say, no, you should get to the next level of taking ethical duty seriously. And even further than that, of taking God seriously. And you can do that without being what Nietzsche would call a despiser of life, right? There are wrong ways to do that. And in fact, the mystic who just sits around, oh, when will God's touch come upon me next? I need the pleasure of the love of the Lord. That is just a different kind, a really weird kind of aesthete, that they're putting satisfaction in the hands of something that's out of their hands, right? That just like I'm relying on the pleasures of women or the pleasures of drink or whatever, using God as a drug like that, also bad. So it's not just like any sort of religious or being religious in a way that is just all about the rules and you just got to do, and you're not actually living for, like, I think Kierkegaard would be against all of that. We got to somehow incorporate all the immature kinds into our very healthy sort of Christianity. I'm not that thing, so I can't speak really from that point of view.
The problem when you talk about this religious sphere for Kierkegaard is it's beyond like language. Like language exists within the ethical sphere. So by its definition, you're dealing in kind of like nonsense and paradox, really. So it's hard to really describe what happens in that. But I know he does describe faith as a passion. And yet, of course, he describes the passions in the aesthetic sphere as being bad, but he does also describe it as a different type of passion. But then, he's using what he admits are kind of like inadequate tools to build a religious edifice, really. And what I was going to say actually is the similarity with improv again is this commitment to it. So, Bill, when you started the improv session, it's kind of like, right, okay, guys, we talk about that scene moment. There is there's a certain kind of commitment to that moment.
Yeah.
And I know, so a lot has been said about this kind of, I listened to the podcast, the Partial Examined podcast about Kierkegaard, and you talked a lot about this kind of what it means to do this commitment and things. Yeah. And I think for me, I imagine it as being something a bit like that, really, to be honest, sitting down and say, right, let's do this. I'm going to commit to this. Like a personal kind of like existential contract between you and a principle.
Yeah, I think it's the kind of thing too that sometimes when people make fun of improv, it's the person who might be called a bulldozer or a kind of a bull in a china shop, and they just pull out a gun and they're just trying to be funny in a way that is outside of what is being created, if that makes sense.
So Robin Williams' sputtering sort of fount of creativity.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes, or in the American version of The Office, Michael Scott, when he took an improv class. And he just thinks it's funny to pull a gun on people, like the scenes we were doing. And it's almost trying to win. And again, it's like it demonstrates a knowledge that what is happening is fake. And it demonstrates that like my ego or pride or identity is somehow involved. And to let go of that and be someone else or be a character or take on a label is somehow weak or wrong or unfunny or won't be accepted well. And that is something that day one, level one in an improv class is that comes up. But there will be people who can almost fake it for a long, long time and aren't authentic or honest in what they're doing. They're still very aware of how is this being perceived, very aware of how am I being perceived, and am I being perceived well. I don't like playing with that person, as you might imagine.
Well, probably if we did some of these scenes 2 years ago when we started this, demonology would definitely have been involved. Some sort of the Boy Scouts, it would have gotten much nastier, much quicker. So I think
Yes.
subtlety is perhaps the...
Yes.
All right. Well, it's got to be either or. Your introduction to the world of improv here and this centering lesson about characters, or everything about Kierkegaard. Which one won the day? For your own benefit and the benefit of our many listeners, you must choose, Jonny, which is the winner today.
So what, the mix or just pure philosophy?
The improv lesson or the philosophy lesson is really what it comes down to.
Improv lesson for me, yeah.
All
yeah.
right. All right.
Oh, wow.
That's a breath of fresh air. This is it's different from the day job.
I'll take the W.
Okay.
All right. I think that's 5 in a row. I'd have to look back at the records, but I'm feeling like the philosophers love to be relieved by the improv, but the improvers just like improv. So there we go.
They're honest. They're speaking their true self.
Yeah.
So I got to up my game clearly. I thought this was a good philosophy discussion though, too. And I'm happy to have you weighing in on this thing that has been haunting my reading for a month and a half or whatever when through various PEL episodes.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. And scene. Here we go. I hope you enjoyed the show. To learn more about Philosophy versus Improv, go to philosophyimprov.com. Make sure you're subscribed directly to the Philosophy versus Improv podcast feed, even if you're listening to this somewhere else. Or better yet, use one of our supporter feeds, which you can learn about at philosophyimprov.com/support. Listening that way will remove all the ads, give you post-game chatting with me and Bill and usually our guests for nearly every episode, supporter-exclusive bonus discussions, and if you support us through patreon.com/philosophyimprov, you'll see links from most of our recent episodes to the unedited video experience, which is objectively better than just listening. Thanks!
I should sell my soul. Bankrupt. Bankrupt. Bankrupt.